Louise Stern grew up in Fremont, California, in a rather tight-knit deaf community. She's fourth-generation deaf on one side of her family, third-generation deaf on the other. She went on to Washington, where she studied art history at the only college for non-hearing people in the United States. And she has told a journalist that she was actually the only art history student in the department at the time. She said it was just her and her teacher. After college, she set out on her own to hitchhike through South America, an experience that certainly shaped the book that I'm going to be telling you about in just a little bit, and also, she says, gave her the courage to move to London in 2002, where she studied art theory for her master's degree and also apprenticed herself as an assistant to working visual artists. She also started working on her own art, and which has been exhibited in numerous places around the world. But it's only this year that her first book has been published. It's a collection of very short stories called Chattering. These stories feature mostly girls and women, though not only, who are deaf, though there are some stories where the ability to hear is ambiguous, though there is this common element of restlessness, of a search for something, a search for the ability to prove something. A certain dislocation is a common theme throughout these tales. I'm going to tell you what I think about this book, but first I'm going to read to you the opening of the first story in the collection, which is called Rio. In Rio, the velvety air felt easy and comfortable. We slept on Copacabana Beach, and our sandals were stolen by one of the bony, dark-skinned group in rags who had set up camp under the nearby palm trees, ringed by bits of rubbish. In the night, after we felt in the sand by our heads for the rubber sandals and discovered them gone, Eva strode over, pointed at some of the boys, and then pointed at her foot. "Give me back," she gestured. "You give me back." She banged her fist with one hand. "Me fight you. Come on, give me back. Me fight you." One of the ragged, wily ones gave her our sandals. Her back seemed very straight next to theirs. In my mind, the most intriguing part of Stern's writing is her transcription/translation of sign language and other nonverbal forms of communication, both between characters who are deaf and also between a non-hearing character and a hearing one. People are speaking not only through sign language but also through gestures, through tone, through writing on pieces of paper, facial expressions, all these other ways that people try to convey what they mean and understand what other people mean. And there's also a variation among that set. You know, some of the characters are deaf but are able to hear more than other characters, and which creates a different dynamic when they're in group settings. This is fascinating in kind of a sociological way. As a hearing person who hasn't spent much time among non-hearing people, it's fascinating to place myself in these communities, to feel the unique tensions and vulnerabilities that are present and palpable when you are a non-hearing person among hearing people, especially among strangers, especially in group settings, especially when alcohol is involved, as it is in many of these stories. In a literary way, it's fascinating to see how Stern embraces the unique kind of communication techniques that are available to her characters as a way of propelling her stories forward, and also just sitting with moments of tension and of vulnerability. There is a spectral quality to a lot of her characters. I mentioned that these are very short stories, and that most of the characters are girls or women. While they have names, these names seem unfixed, unhinged. The lines between one story and the next are not very clear and not very distinct. On one hand, this is appealing in that Stern gives a cohesive feel and texture to her tales. The reader is invited to swim along with her from one to the next. But on the other hand, I think Stern mistakes vagueness for subtlety in these stories, both in the development of her characters and in the plot. There is a sort of annoying adriftness to these tales, which are very exposition heavy, where it feels like there's no there quite often, that I'm invited to sit in a space that is groundless, which is fine and intriguing, and how I love participating in fiction as a reader. But it seems the purposelessness of a lot of the characters seems to poison the stories themselves, and ultimately my experience reading these stories. I enjoyed it, but with key limitations. I enjoyed it more when I started letting go of a lot of expectations, I think. Some of the stories definitely stand out from others. There's one of them. It's called, what is it called? It's called Abel, Granny, and Him. And this is a case where I think that groundlessness that poisons a lot of the stories actually is used really effectively and shows that Stern is quite capable. She pushes the philosophical edge of her tale. It works out into a sort of case study of three characters that have a common connectiveness in the view of the protagonist. The juxtapositions are really interesting. The reader is invited to speculate, to wonder, to ponder in a way that feels like it has a little bit more direction than a lot of the other stories, which seem young, and not just young because the characters are young. In short, I think Louise Stern has a sharp eye, a graceful writing ability, and fascinating stories that she has to tell. I just hope that for her next book, she pushes into more of that telling, into more of the storytelling, as opposed to the moment by moment fixation.